Colleagues, welcome to the 10th meeting of City Council. For the benefit of the public, this is a virtual meeting held during the COVID-19 emergency. We'd ask you to check the city website for current details of COVID-19 service impacts. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committees and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. So just to confirm that we have quorum, may I ask for everyone to have screens on, please? I'll let the clerk confirm quorum.
Councillor Kayabaga.
I'm here.
I've been advised that Councillor Van Holst is not available for today's meeting, and as is our direction, we advise colleagues accordingly as individuals are in a position where they must leave a meeting or return. So with that, I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I might declare one to get us started under Civic Works, items 2.9 and 5, dealing with Waterloo Street, Piccadilly Street issues, as my family has a small retail business in that area. Any other disclosures? Seeing none. Before we get into recognitions, I'd like to do one thing if I can, which is a little out of the ordinary. We have a new member from staff who is here today. I was introduced just recently, and I'm going to ask Mr. Card if he would make an introduction of this person, just so we know some of the players who are on the screen from staff. I wonder, Mr. Card, could I impose on you?
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I am pleased to introduce Venetia R., who is completing her time as an articling student with us. In fact, she was called to the bar on Saturday because of the pandemic. We followed an unconventional practice. Ms. R received an email item from the Law Society informing her of her call to the bar. So we join in congratulating Venetia on her call to the bar. She will be joining us after a brief vacation as a solicitor, assisting Ainsley Anderson and Sasha Tatavardi with their work, and we're pleased to welcome Venetia back. And thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity.
And Venetia, on behalf of council, we welcome you to our larger family, and we're sure that you will enjoy us as much as I'm sure we'll have the honor to work with you as well. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Great. Colleagues, we have two points of recognition that I've been advised of. I'd like to first call on Councillor Hillier, please.
Thank you very much. I'm just here to let everyone know that Bob Usher has given his notice and will be retiring this fall. And we have started the process of finding another person to fill his position. And I'd like to also say a special thanks to Bob from the board and myself, because what you may not realize, when COVID started, Bob had actually spoken to us just previously about talking about retirement, and he decided to stay on and help out. And this is a very big thing for us, because I don't know how we would have replaced him during COVID. So a big hats off to Bob Usher, and thank you for 18 years of amazing service.
I know we all echo that. Thank you very much, Councillor Hillier. I also have recognition from Councillor Lewis, if you would, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Colleagues, I rise tonight to recognize an important anniversary in the fabric of Canada's cultural and historic heritage. Many look to the Battle of Vimy Ridge and the following contributions to the efforts of World War I, where Canadian forces fought for the first time together as a moment of our nation's coming of age on the world stage. But we all know that that contribution came at a great cost. Following the war, a grateful Frenchwoman, Madame Anna Guérin, later christened the Poppy Lady from France, was inspired by Canadian John McCrae's home in Flanders Fields and had an idea to adopt the distribution of the poppy on Armistice Day as a way to raise money for veterans of the Great War. On July 5th of 1921, the Great War Veterans Association, which in 1925 would unify with other veterans groups to form the Royal Canadian Legion, adopted the poppy as the flower of remembrance. Since then, the Legion and its members have upheld this tradition of remembrance. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the annual poppy campaign. Supported by generations and generations of Canadians. And tonight, I'm wearing a recreation of the first poppy pin distributed by veterans associations. And each of you will find one for you to wear in your City Hall offices, courtesy of the Royal Canadian Legion. While Council will be receiving a proclamation request later this year to mark 2021 as the year of the poppy, on this 100 years and 1 day anniversary of its adoption as the symbol of remembrance, I want to recognize the generations of Canadians who have donned their poppy each and every year, lest we forget.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Colleagues, I'm advised that Councillor Turner has excused himself from the meeting, but looks to be returning a little bit later on. I'm not aware of any confidential matters to be considered in public, but colleagues, under item 4, what I'm looking for is a change in order motion, which is required to move this item, which is our confidential matters in closed session, and 10th report of council in closed session after stage 13 bylaws. So for that, I would look for a mover. Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Let's call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed, 13-0.
Thank you, colleagues. To approve the minutes from the meeting held on June 15th, and that they be put on the floor. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call that question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed, 13-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I have not applications nor petitions nor motions to which notice is given. That puts us right to the reports. The 11th report of the Corporate Services Committee. I'd call on Councillor Cassidy, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not aware of items to be pulled, but I will wait to see if there are any items that colleagues would like to pull.
Does anyone wish anything to be dealt with separately? Seeing none, over to you, Councillor Cassidy.
I'm happy to put the entire report on the floor then, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I reviewed the, in particular, the item issuance of proclamations pilot program review. My understanding is that this matter will be coming back to committee for review. So I just want to make it clear at this point in time that I don't feel the necessity of taking a position on what's going to come back at this point in time and belabor the point tonight, but I'm certainly going to reserve my rights to see what the final draft is and what this looks like when it comes back. And I may or may not support it then, but I don't want to not go on record of taking that position.
Thanks very much. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed, 13-0.
Thanks very much. And that then moves us to, back to you, Councillor Cassidy.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. We had a brief meeting, special meeting of corporate services with one confidential item. So I will put that report, the 12th meeting of corporate services, on the floor.
You appreciate it was confidential. I will ask if there's any comments. Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Councillor Helmer?
The voting is not coming up. I'm voting in favor.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 13-0.
Councillor Cassidy?
Your Worship.
Thanks very much. Then I'll turn this now to the Ninth Report of Civic Works. Councillor Pelosi, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have been given notice to pull items 10 being 2.9, the Waterloo and Piccadilly area traffic study, as well as 15 being 5.1, the deferred matters list, as requested by yourself. I've not been given notice by any other members of council for anything to be pulled.
Does anyone wish to have anything voted on separately? And seeing none, I might just suggest, if this is appropriate, that 2.9 and 5.1, if you wish, can be voted on as a package, because I'll be abstaining from both, Madam Chair.
Yep.
Comments then and questions then with regard to all items with the exception of items 10 and items 15.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'll just say that as I put the remainder of the items on the floor, that everything was unanimous vote at committee. There was a couple of requests from the Cycling Advisory Committee that was granted by the Civic Works Committee, and everything else was just regular tenders and no irregular contracts.
Thank you thanks for that clarity. Any other comments or questions with respect to the items that are on the table? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
I believe Councillor Cassidy has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Cassidy, that's a faded hand in the corner, but I see you now. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to comment on 2.5 from the Civic Works report, which is the appointment of a consulting engineer for the Damon Creek subwatershed project. I just wanted to say that we got some federal funding for that project, about $300,000, and wanted to comment that that's great news for the City of London, and I'm pretty grateful to the federal government for that funding. This will go towards a really good project there. So just want to point that out. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on those items? Is your hand still up, Councillor Cassidy? Because I'm paying attention now.
I thought I took it down, but somebody must have taken it down for me, and I ended up putting it up again. So my apologies.
Thank you. Any other comments? Then let's call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 13-0.
Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you. I'll now put items 10 being 2.9, item 5.1 together on the floor for council's consideration.
Any comments or questions, colleagues? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 12-0 with one recused.
Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Worship. That concludes the report, and staff had just noted that item 2.8, being the ARVA Huron Water Transmission Main, it's an EA, is going to be available on the Get Involved London website. If the public wishes to provide feedback, that's how they can do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the 10th report of Plan and Environment Committee, Councillor Squire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that number 14 will have to be pulled. That's 2.2. Councillor Hopkins has a motion. I'm not aware of any other matters at this time. Councillor Hopkins, oh, perhaps I should add number 16, 3.2. There was a split vote on that matter. I apologize, Councillor Hopkins. You did vote opposite to the rest of the members of the committee.
Colleagues,
not aware of any other matters.
I'm sorry, Councillor Squire. Does anyone wish anything else to be dealt with separately? Councillor Squire.
I put all the other matters on the floor.
Thank you. Comments or questions on the balance of the agenda with the exception of 2.2 and 3.2? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Thank you, Councillor Squire.
Item 14 or 2.2 is a memorandum of understanding for development and or planning review between the City of London and UTRCA. This is a proposed agreement between us and the UTRCA with regard to roles to be undertaken with regard to these matters. Councillor Hopkins has brought a motion to have the final agreement brought back to the Planning Committee. I think that is the motion. And I have had a chance to talk to staff, and they have no difficulty in doing that. So if that's of any assistance as we move forward with the motion, but that's all I have to say.
I think we would require to have something put officially or appropriately on the floor. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I have passed I hope Council will see this as a friendly amendment, but it is a Clause D, which reads that Civic Administration be directed to bring forward a final DMOU to a future meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. I would like to put that on the floor. I know I did have a seconder. I'm hoping that there's someone on council that will second this for at least a debate.
Seconded by Councillor Pelosi. Thank you. Comments or questions, colleagues? Seeing, oh, thank you. Oh, and pardon me, and Councillor Turner is back. So the practice we have in Councillor Turner is not just to send anyone out, but just to let folks know when people have had to leave the meeting, which we're appreciative that you advise the clerk, and then we advise colleagues. So with that, we have a mover and a seconder. I see no comments. We'll call the question.
Your Worship,
Councillor Hopkins, yes, did you want to comment?
if I may.
Oh, absolutely. Just let me know.
I appreciate that. I know it was a discussion at planning. I had pulled it. I did have a number of questions and concerns on this, and the recommendation for my colleagues, it addresses the MOU. This is not the MOU that will be coming to us. This is the DMOU, which is the Development Memorandum of Understanding. And I do also sit on the Upper Thames Conservation Board, and I know there's a number of changes that are about to happen. And like a colleague of mine said, we have to start somewhere. So I want to first of all thank staff for reaching out to me and having the conversation on the DMOU. I think it was appreciative, and I am hoping that council will at least address the concerns that I've had with not having the information. As you know, the provincial government has not set out the regulations for conservation authorities or Section 28. But I do understand that staff and Upper Thames are in the process of working together to come about with this contract. And all contracts, regardless if they are substantially complete or not, are signed by two parties. And I have two hats here that I am wearing. I do appreciate the chair, Councillor Squire, for mentioning that he did follow up with staff. But through you, Your Worship, I would like to ask staff if they have any concerns that the final DMOU should be brought to council.
Well, let's take it back to staff for a response. Go ahead, please.
Through His Worship, it's George Costas. No, we don't have any concerns coming back to PEC with the final MOU and a subsequent approval by council.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm hoping my colleagues will support the D clause. I am not going to be supporting A to C just because I do think there's a bit more work to be done. I'd like to see a little bit more work before I do approve something. There's a number of reviews, and as we know, this is just the DMOU just relates to planning services only. So I hope my colleagues will be supportive of this amendment.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I certainly have no problem with the information coming back, although through you to staff, we're delegating authority so that staff can work with Upper Thames to finalize this and execute it. Would this not be information that any councillor, or for that matter, a member of the public, would be able to access as a matter of public record once it's executed?
Let's take that back to staff for response.
Through Your Worship, I think ultimately it would be, I'll defer to Mr. Barrett or Mr. Falberg. They're both on the line to help with the specifics of the MOU. Mr.
Barrett, do you want to give that a try?
Thank you. Through your worship. Certainly, it's generally an administrative matter, but it would also be something that the public could see. But we would have no issue in bringing it back, as the councillors noted. We're asking the delegated authority that we would pursue the agreement, and then we can come back and report out to committee and council as to what changes there might have been to the agreement and what it now says, and what the nature of the relationship is going to be with the Upper Thames.
Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you again to our staff, I want to be clear with all members of council present. What we heard at Planning Committee is that if there are substantive changes to this draft version, I believe at committee, Mr. Barrett indicated he would be bringing this back to Planning Committee anyway if there were substantive changes. I just want to make sure that that is in fact correct.
Mr. Barrett?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. We would be bringing it back.
Councillor Lewis?
Thank you. So as I said at the beginning, I don't have a problem supporting Councillor Hopkins' request to have a report come back to Planning Committee, although I'm not sure what really we're going to accomplish other than adding a few more pages of a report to a Planning Committee agenda. We're going to send our staff out with delegated authority to negotiate this with Upper Thames based on what was in the agenda previously, and then once that's done and executed, they'll come back to us and provide us with a final version. But I think it's really important that we don't get bogged down in the weeds here. It's just going to come back to us. This isn't asking for council's endorsement in the future. This is just to come back with a finalized report for us to see. So, and I do understand Councillor Hopkins' concern about provincial regulations changing. But I think when this is with regard to planning services, this is pretty straightforward for me. I will say that I will disagree with Councillor Hopkins that we can even have a D if there isn't an A, B, and C supported. But that may just be a matter of difference of opinion between her and I. So I'll leave it at that.
So noted. Any other comments or questions, colleagues? So this is, to be clear, we're now voting on the amendment, and I will ask the clerk to bring that up.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-1.
Councillor Squire? No, we've got, sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Oh, I'm sorry. You got it. Yeah,
You-
do the main motion.
Yeah, so the
To move the motion as amended.
main motion as amended. Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Cassidy, thank you. Comments or questions that haven't been covered? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-1.
Item 3.2, which is a approval of an extension of a temporary parking lot at I'm gonna put my glasses on, 193 Queens Avenue. We had a report from staff on this, and the committee supported the extension, save and except for Councillor Hopkins. So I'm prepared to move the staff recommendation.
Thanks very much. Comments or questions, colleagues? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to this parcel, I recognize in the downtown traffic study, this is one of the higher areas for demand. However, along the BRT corridor, these have been areas that are identified for prioritization of development. At what point do we start to have conversations with these landowners and say that we don't routinely renew the temporary parking exemptions allowed for these surface parking spots?
Sorry, is that was that a question to staff?
Yeah, it's a question through you to staff. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Just to be clear, thank you. Staff would like to respond to that, please.
Through His Worship, so we do have conversations with applicants, and we do advise them that in many instances, the temporary parking lot extensions are not something that are greatly supported. We have in the past, so council has in the past either refused or reduced the timelines and have had clauses in the approvals or in the recommendation to just highlight the fact that future extensions or prolonged extensions may not be considered. That it could be also another indicator to the applicants that where council wishes these matters to go in the future. Recognizing you can't bind a future council, however, some of these clauses could be written in a way that so as not to do so.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Kostafis raises the right point, is that we can't find a future council, which is why I'm not going to be routinely supporting any of these motions as they come forward, as we're in our last year and a half of the term. And most of these are for 3-year extensions. One of the challenges I have, especially with this site, is that when the demolition permit was requested, there was a promise that in short order a building would go up in its place, and that was a long time ago. It was over 2 terms of council ago. So I don't have much faith that without without discontinuing those permissions, that we would see anything in any short order or anytime soon develop on that site, especially as this applicant has decided to move forward to another site for development instead in priority. So, so I'm not going to support the recommendation as it comes. I would encourage my colleagues to do the same.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. So there's a paragraph in the committee agenda where it says this application does not represent an extension of an existing temporary use bylaw. So my question to staff is, has this been operating as a parking lot in contravention of the bylaw?
Mr. Kotsvis?
Through your worship, I'm going to pull on Mr. Barrett to help us with some of the specifics of this file.
Mr. Barrett, go
but
ahead.
I do believe they have been operating as a parking lot. Initially, they were designed to be, it was a use for their tenants in the area, but I will ask Mr. Barrett to help.
Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, through your worship. I believe Mr. Kotsvis actually gave the answer I was going to, which was when it was initially opened, it was, I believe, identified as an accessory parking lot for another operation, and it, I think, morphed over time to the commercial lot, and it's now in to have that recognized through the temporary zoning.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple of other questions through you to staff. I see the utilization rate is in the zone. This zone has a utilization rate of around 81%. Is that, are we, and I recognize that 2020 and 2021 are different because of COVID, but we did the downtown parking strategy some time ago. Have we been updating these utilization rates, or are we still using the same figures that we came up with back when the downtown parking strategy was created?
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, through your worship. There hasn't been an update done, and these are the utilization rates from that original study, I believe 2018.
Councillor Cassidy.
Through you, Your Worship, is there a plan to update these utilization rates?
Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, through your worship. This has come up, and it is something that I believe the committee has asked us to look at. And I think, as the councillor also noted, 2020 and 2021 are odd years, which is the reason we're not looking at it now, because we really wouldn't get a sense of what the utilization rates are within the parking areas in the downtown. So at this point, we can only rely on those numbers that we did have from the previous study. As we find ourselves on hopefully the backside and the downside of this pandemic, we'll be getting into periods where we will move back to some sort of regularity, where we will be able to do an assessment on what the parking needs are. The council, though, did note something else that I just want to perhaps point out that might just assist in this, which is, and we did grapple with this, but it is because things are different. There is the work that's going on downtown. There is the, as we know, the support that's we're looking to provide for Dundas Place. And we have the limited access to Dundas Place now because of traffic restrictions. So that did figure much into staff's recommendation on this, was that given the nature of not knowing what our future needs were, but knowing what our needs were with respect to providing as much opportunity and support to Dundas Place as we could, that was something that very much factored in the recommendation that's before you this evening.
Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my final comments and questions have to do with the landscaping requirements. So I know it's noted in the report that there's some soft landscaping on adjacent lands, but if anybody just has to look at the parking lot itself, it's not very attractive. It's definitely not an asset to our downtown. It doesn't make our downtown better other than providing parking. My question through you to staff is, in the criteria laid out, number whatever it is, it talks about the requirement that this contribute to the tree canopy and provide a 30% tree canopy. Obviously, this does not comply with that. So my question to staff is, if we were, if somebody were building a brand new parking lot, if we were allowing this, if it was an accessory parking lot to a development, not just downtown, anywhere in the city, would we not have landscaping requirements? Would we not impose landscaping requirements, pedestrian islands, et cetera, to a developer that is looking to build a brand new parking lot? That's one question. Number two is, why aren't we imposing those same kinds of criteria here? And third question is, can we not please do something like that if we are going to continue to have these rolling 3-year extensions? If we don't want these surface parking lots to take away from our downtown, why are we not imposing the same kinds of criteria that we would on a brand new development?
So those are 3 questions, Mr. Barrett. Do you think you can handle them all? I know you can. Go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship. Would we apply these standards to new parking lots? As the councillor answered that question, yes, we would. Why not here? And could we possibly do that? There are some issues around this, and it's certainly something we can pursue further in conversation with the applicant and the owner. Part of the problem is the applicability of site plan, and it's a combination of both our own site plan control bylaw and also prohibitions that exist within the legislation and what constitutes development. And in some places and in some reading, the establishment of the parking lot itself might not meet that test for what constitutes development, but there are things that we can look at through our own site plan control bylaw. So it is something we are aware of and something that we are looking at rectifying and perhaps providing a little bit more certainty. But with this conversation and with knowing where council stands on these matters, it's certainly something we can go back and speak with on the applicant, because there will be further work that's required on this.
Thank you. Anything else, councillor?
No, I'm done, your worship. I won't be supporting this. I think that the owner has not done enough to have this extension going on. I think they could do so much better in helping with the downtown. And so I can't support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to try to convince anybody to vote a certain way. I voted in favor of this. What I do want to point out is there's been a lot of discussion, I know, in the past couple of months in the community and elsewhere, that council just sort of routinely approves, reapproves surface parking lots. And I have to admit that I take issue with that somewhat, particularly where there are a number of criteria that are in place in the current official plan, in the London plan, in the downtown plan, with regard to the criteria that are to be applied if you are going to allow a continuation of a surface parking lot. And those should be carefully reviewed by staff and by council, and a determination should be made if those criteria have been met, and a vote should be taken. So that's what I do. And in this particular case, I read the report. I saw that there was a high utilization rate in that area of 81%. In that particular zone, there will actually be a deficit supply of parking spaces of 65 by 2034, even when one considers BRT is going to be in place, and so mode share is projected to change somewhat from cars to other things. And I'm also was persuaded by whether there's actually a frustration of the development of this land. And I was of the mind, this was an area that was going to be, and I understand tender proposals were being put forward for this to be a downtown parking development. And that was frustrated by the city itself deciding not to do that. So the idea that there had been some kind of frustration of development in this particular case was the fault of the city, if you want to call it fault. I'm not sure it's fault, but it's just a change of evaluation by the city. But as we go forward, I really think it's incumbent on council to go along with what the London plan says, which is we generally discourage surface parking lots downtown. That's the starting point. And if we are going to allow their continuance, we have to look at these criteria. And I was satisfied that the criteria were met in this particular case. So I'm not going to be routinely approving anything. If anybody, I mean, I would think people would think, no, I'm the last person that routinely approves things. I go deep into them, I look in the criteria, but I think it's important that we don't sort of isolate this to well, there's people who like surface parking lots and there's people who don't like surface parking lots, because that shouldn't be the discussion. The discussion should be whether the criteria have been met in this particular case. And I'm speaking more to the public who in the last few weeks have come to us and said on a particular development, well, we don't want development here, we want it on a surface parking lot somewhere. Fair enough. But as a council, we have to make the evaluation on those surface parking lots as the applications come forward. That's all we should be doing. We have the tools to do it. And I'm entirely in favor of us saying yes to some surface parking lots and no to other ones that don't meet the criteria.
And I'm sure, Councillor, when you said frustrated, you meant that in the legal sense of the term. So thank you for that.
Always.
Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I did not support this at committee, and I haven't been convinced here at council that this should go forward. I appreciate Councillor Cassidy's questions around this parking lot being a new parking lot. That's more or less how I view this parking area, even though it has been a parking spot since 2007, but we are right now approving a commercial parking lot and in an area that is of critical importance. And I would think that having some kind of development, even a parking structure or development with parking, this would be an ideal spot. And the fact that we are, I wouldn't say routinely, this is a new parking lot, encouraging parking lots in downtown and not encouraging development. So I will not be supporting staff's recommendation coming to us tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to take the time to repeat everything Councillor Squire said, but like him, to me, it's important that we're reviewing these based on the criteria. And that criteria is actually not who owns it. It's about, does the parking lot meet its criteria for need? And it was referenced that the utilization rate is about 81% right now, both for this lot and for this zone that this lot is in. I think it's important that folks understand, and both to the public and to other members of council who may not have read the full report, 90% is considered practical maximum capacity, not 100%. So you're only within 9% of maximum capacity anyway. You know, we've spent a great deal of time over the past year as we've dealt with the impacts of COVID and the plan to start recovering from COVID on the importance of downtown and investment in the downtown. Well, if we really want Dundas Place to succeed, the reality is BRT is still years away. People need a place to park if they're going to visit those shops and be customers of those restaurants and bars and places where we're letting put out patios right now. And so if we're not going to provide them parking, the recovery of Dundas Place and the businesses around it is not going to be as successful as it could be. So I will support this. I supported it at council or at committee. And is this the highest and best use of the land? Absolutely not. I agree with all of my colleagues on this. But what we have is a 3-year request. And I think that that's reasonable considering we're gonna have downtown construction for at least the next 3 years as the BRT plan moves forward. And we are going to have a long time coming out of the COVID pandemic before we've recovered to where we were pre-pandemic. So I'm gonna support this now. I too would like to see something better developed here, but I'm also mindful of what Councillor Squire pointed out. There was an opportunity for proposals to come in for the municipal lot right next door to this site. And then we froze that because of COVID. And in fact, there was a push to have it removed, and council recently supported keeping it in the recovery plan. So if we're supporting keeping it in the recovery plan, that we perhaps need a mixed use, including a parking structure on the adjacent property next door, then surely we must understand that there's parking needed in this particular zone right now.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Pardon me, Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, and thank you to my colleagues who've spoken already on this. I appreciate the perspective. I just wanted to share my thoughts. I appreciate our staff's recommendation, and in particular, something Mr. Barrett said about the data that they're working from in the report being very old, and also the considerations that he mentioned about the period which we're working through during COVID. I certainly am very interested in updated data on parking utilization downtown as soon as it's appropriate to start gathering that data and the situation normalizes to a certain degree. In the absence of having that information, I personally am hesitant, and I do align with our staff's thinking on this, in making any sort of significant change until we can get through the current situation and start to think about the next. And the second thing I'll say is, canceling temporary surface parking lots certainly could be one way that we support or try to encourage development downtown. But I don't want the public to think that that's the only thing that we're doing to encourage development downtown. We certainly have a number of incentive programs through the CIP program at play that assists in the development of residential capacity downtown. And those should continue, and I'm certainly supportive of them. But at this time, I think renewing this for another 3 years, given the point we are in the pandemic, is appropriate. I certainly won't commit myself to doing that indefinitely, but I think in this case, I agree with our staff's assessment on this, and we'll reassess at the next point in the future.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Elmer.
Thank you. I wanted to just return to a specific detail around this application, which is making the decision harder for me than I think it would be otherwise, which is the fact that there's no existing temporary use for service parking on the existing lands. So for me, the difficulty, and this is what I'm trying to resolve, is the downtown parking strategy has a policy that says we shouldn't issue new temporary use zoning permissions for parking. So there's, on the one hand, gradual discontinuation of parking lots according to the utilization numbers that we've got, so in the areas that are low utilization, stop renewing those ones, and then also don't issue any new temporary use permissions. So I want to just, I guess, through the mayor to planning staff, see how you wrestle with that, because obviously it has been functionally being used as a parking lot, although accessory to other uses for many years. This is a new temporary use zoning permission that's being sought that doesn't exist now. It's not a renewal. And so how did you resolve that, considering what's in the downtown parking strategy where it says no new temporary use zoning permissions?
Mr. Barrett?
Thank you, through your worship. I guess the way we resolved that was the fact that it has been operating as essentially as that temporary surface parking. It hasn't been accessory to those uses. It has been serving as a commercial parking lot, and not just as the accessory parking lot. And the councillor is right. It's not completely foursquare with those policies, but again, I think, as I indicated, we did grapple with this, and it's the timing. It's not knowing what the conditions are, not knowing, in fact, and as has been pointed out, we're working off old data. We don't know what the downtown parking utilization rates are going to be in the future. We do know that this parking lot has been highly used, and so obviously has contributed to the parking supply, whether it was as a commercial surface parking lot or as an accessory surface parking lot. It was part of that downtown parking supply, and that, quite honestly, is the only explanation that I can provide for why we did bring forward the recommendation that's in front of you this evening.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to support the temporary use for the parking on this particular site. I'm basically going to ignore the fact that it didn't have a temporary use zone in the past. It's been a parking lot for a long time, and I think the intent behind that policy is don't allow new surface parking lots to pop up, where there's been a demolition or there wasn't existing surface parking. So, I hate to kind of reward somebody for not following the zoning rules in the past. Having something that's operating outside of the zoning is not good. We don't want to see that happening in the city, but this seems like kind of a technicality to hold it up. I do support the renewal of surface parking in areas where there's high demand. And I voted against the extension of surface parking lots in zones 1, 2, 5, and 6. And in zones 3 and 4, I don't think we should be discontinuing those right now. I think eventually we will need to discontinue them. This is the area, in the area around the downtown loop and Dundas Place, where there's been significant impacts in terms of on-street parking. And so I think keeping the surface parking lots in those areas is important. Just across the street and to the west on Central, I voted against the renewal of those surface parking lots. I didn't hear a lot of argument saying we needed to follow the policy from colleagues then, talking about utilization rates and so on. But I could tell by looking at the map that that was an area that was relatively low utilization, which is why I didn't vote to support it. This, however, is an area where there's high utilization. And so, even when we know that there's going to be on-street parking losses, there already have been, and there will be more in the same area, it's going to bring the utilization probably in the area of 84% or 85% in the sub area 4, which is the area we're talking about. So that's close enough to 90 to say I think we should leave it alone for now. I do think having a mixed-use building on this site and the site beside it would be much better than the surface parking lots that are there, and hopefully that can happen in the next couple of years if we can see some kind of development proposal happen on the site that's owned by the city or the site that is beside it, or both of them. That would be a great step forward for this area. So I'll support the temporary use zoning on this particular site. A difficult decision because it is a new temporary use zone, and I think it would be easy to just follow the letter of the policy and say, well, it's new, I'm not going to support it. But considering it's an area of high demand, I will support this one.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for their comments tonight. What we have downtown is a very fluid situation in a lot of areas, including parking. We're now coming out of COVID, and we're hoping to get businesses and merchants back on their feet, and especially on Dundas Street. We've invested a lot of money and planning to get this street back on its feet, and I'm very confident we're going to see great things. However, now's not the time to cancel a significant parking area, which by reports is fully utilized, without a plan to find alternative spots. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine today, and we were talking about another planning issue. And he had this saying, he said, you don't want to jump out of a plane without a parachute. We've heard discussion tonight about the city looking at a parking garage in that area and some other concepts as well, which I think we should explore, along with a parking plan fully developed, where we are supporting customers, employees of businesses downtown that we want to see thrive. We don't know what parking is going to be after BRT's implemented in that leg, or what parking needs are going to be for offices, et cetera, downtown with work at home changes. We don't know whether that's going to be permanent or if employees are going to be coming back or how that's going to look. So I think this is the wrong time to make a significant change in that area. We can't cut the legs out from under the merchants and businesses along Dundas Street, which needs our support more than ever to get that area up and running. But this discussion should be held at the appropriate time when we have alternatives in place and we fully understand the layout of the land in terms of commerce and transportation needs. So I will support this.
Thank you. I'm looking to see that if I have any other speakers on the list. I see none. We will call the vote.
Councillor Van Meerbergen?
I'll vote yes.
Thank you. Closing the vote. The motion's passed 10-4.
Thank you. Councillor Sklar?
That's done appropriately.
Thank you very much. For the 10th report of Community Protective Services, we'll be calling on Councillor Hilliard to present the report.
Thank you. I haven't heard from anyone. I present the 10th report of CAPS in its entirety. Would anyone like anything pulled on that?
Well, I'll even ask that question as well. If anyone would like any vote to be dealt with or any issue to be dealt with and voted separately. Back to you, Councillor Hilliard.
Not seeing anything. I put the entire agenda on the floor.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. First, I wanted to say thank you to Councillor Hillier for stepping in and chairing the meeting from City Hall. Appreciated that very much. On item 2.7, the homeless allowance program, there's some increases in the service agreements with the St. Leonard Society and London Cares. And I just wanted to draw colleagues' attention to that. That's obviously an important program where we help people lower the cost of rent so that there's more units effectively on the market that they could be renting. And good to see an increase happening there. I also wanted to say we had a wonderful delegation from Sarah Campbell representing WISH, and also Dan Turner, who was a participant at one of the temporary sites that was set up as part of the winter response, answered a number of questions from committee. And I thought Mr. Turner in particular did a really great job answering questions and talking about the experience at the temporary shelters.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And I will apologize to our staff. Usually I'm very good about giving them a heads up when I'm going to ask a question, and I did not on this one. So I'll certainly give the out that if the information isn't available, I'd certainly take it at a future committee meeting instead. It stems from a question I asked at the committee on the delegation related to fireworks. And in response, Ms. Smith gave a very good response about the additional measures that the city was taking to both educate the public as well as provide some proactive enforcement over what was the upcoming Canada Day long weekend, which has now passed. And I certainly have still had complaints from members of the public about individuals not complying with the bylaw. And I wonder if any sort of stats will be available about the proactive enforcement that we've done. And if that could be, if not shared tonight, could it be shared at a future committee meeting?
I wonder if we might direct that to Mr. Katolik.
Thank you. Through the chair, it's Cheryl Smith. I can start with a response on that one and then turn it over to George or Orst. Thank you for the question. And we can speak directly to the London Fire Department because we had an enhanced enforcement over the period of from Canada Day until the Saturday, July 3rd. And we undertook about 64 calls regarding fireworks, ranging from calls about outside of the allowable hours, calls about outside of the allowable days, and also calls just to complain about the excess noise and garbage related to leaving fireworks. And then also about fireworks happening in public places such as parks. So that total was 64, and that's what we had that came directly to the London Fire Department over July 1st to 4th, I believe.
Mr. Kotzvis, anything to add to that?
Through your worship, no, I don't have anything further to add, but if there's any additional statistics that the councillor is looking for, we can certainly bring something back.
Then back to the deputy mayor.
Thank you, and I appreciate that I did surprise with that question, so thanks to Ms. Smith and Mr. Kosovis for the answer. I would say there's certainly been renewed calls for us to consider changes to the fireworks policy. My concern with that is that in the absence of the bylaw functioning as it was intended, with people actually complying with it and fireworks happening on the days that they're supposed to, I don't think the public is getting a good assessment on how the bylaw is intended to work. And so I am interested in how this new proactive enforcement went, and if Mr. Kosovich could provide either some information to myself or to the committee members directly in the future, I think that would be helpful for us to assess how that different approach that we took this time around went. So I'll leave it at that, and I appreciate the responses that I got today.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions with respect to the report? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to make a comment on item 2.5 from the committee. Item 2.6, the homeless prevention COVID-19 response, because some questions came up at committee. I was observing, and this is also questions that also came up in the community. I received some messages and emails about this. So it's with regard to the York Street temporary shelter that finished at the end of June. Council had approved an extension at that site. It was supposed to finish at the end of March, and the extension went through until the end of June. So Mr. Dickens answered some questions at the committee, and I think it's important for the community to hear if they didn't see this at committee, but that working with WISH and with staff doing the work that they are doing, there is a significant work taking place to transition people that had been living at the York Street site to permanent housing, and to permanent housing with supports. They were finalizing agreements to house people that were currently living at York. There at the time, maybe we could get an update through you, Your Worship, from Mr. Dickens or somebody else, that there was a very low chance that people would have to move into hotels, which is not the ideal situation. And there was active work going on to transition people to those permanent housing with supports. There was also an ability for people who didn't want to go where it was recommended to continue using some day and resting spaces until permanent housing could be found. So perhaps, Your Worship, if there is an update that is available since the Community and Protective Services Committee meeting, because June 30th has passed, and so York Street is off the grid. So wondering if everybody was successful in making that transition through you, Your Worship.
Okay, there's the specific question. Thank you. Perhaps a brief answer from Mr. Dickens, please.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the question. We are very excited with the progress that has been made. The WISH organization continues to work with the city on finalizing all of the rental agreements and cautiously moving all of the 24 participants from York Street into an apartment program, all under the same roof with supports on site. So we continue to collect some important information from our community partners, but those agreements are being finalized as we speak, actually. We are in the process of the wind down stage of the York Street site. The WISH organization does hold a lease with the property owner that does extend through the end of this week. And we have certainly run into vacation season. So we've hit a couple delays just in our wind down process, but outside of those hiccups, the individuals are in fact progressing quite nicely towards a place they can call their own with supports on site. And those that may not stay or use that space as permanent housing are certainly offered or afforded the other number of programs that we have brought forward in our CAPS report.
Councillor Cassidy?
That's it, Your Worship, and thank you through you to Mr. Dickens for that update.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions with respect to the report? It's been put on the floor by Councillor Hillier. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Anything else, Councillor Hillier?
That's everything.
All right, thank you very much. So for the 10th report of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, I'll call upon the Deputy Mayor to present the report.
Yes, I'm happy to present the 10th meeting of the SPPC committee. There were no disclosures of interest, so I guess I would look to colleagues to see if there's anything that they would like dealt with separately, and then I can arrange the appropriate motions.
Well, let's ask that question. Any issues that colleagues would like to have dealt with separately, voted separately? The reason we make the distinction about voted versus talking is because if you're looking to vote separately, then it needs to be pulled. Otherwise, it can be talked to in terms of the broad report. Councillor Helmer?
Number 6 or 3.3, the appointments to the London Middlesex Community Housing Board.
Thank you. Anything else that colleagues would wish to have dealt with separately? Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Okay, given that, I'm happy to put all items 1 through 11, with the exception of 6, which is the appointments to the London Middlesex Community Housing, as well as their AGM report on the floor. So that's everything except item 6.
Thank you. Comments or questions on all but item 6? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yes. 3.3, so item 6 from this agenda, 3.3 from the committee agenda. There are a number of clauses in this. I'll put the whole thing on the floor and look to Councillor Helmer to see which part he'd like to deal with separately in what way.
Councillor Helmer?
Thank you. I wanted to deal with the council appointments to the board separately. Everything else I don't need separated out, but the council appointments in clause E, they're included along with all the rest. So if we could break those out separately. I will say my intention before the meeting started was to have a vote on these directly, but considering that Councillor Van Holst is not here, instead what I'm going to propose is that we refer these to our next SPPC meeting and then we can vote on it there.
So if I understand that item 3.3, we'd be voting on all items with the exception of E for this vote, unless any other colleague would like to have any other comments to that. Deputy Mayor?
As a clarification, Your Worship, I believe Councillor Helmer said it was only the council appointments that he had an issue with. So ideally, we could approve all of the other appointments if he's okay with that. And so if we could craft a motion that deals with everything, including the parts of E that are not related to the council appointments, I'd like to try to get all of those through, and then we could deal with just the council appointments separately, if that's okay, Councillor Helmer.
Okay, so that's been put on the floor by the Deputy Mayor with all of the appointments with the exception of the council appointments. Comments or the clerk wants to weigh in. Go ahead, clerk.
Thank you through the chair. The clerk doesn't want to weigh in. She just has a question. I just would like to confirm that it is the City of London appointments and not all of the elected official appointments that we're going to pull out of there. Yes, I see nods. Thank you.
Yeah, that's for the benefit of those who can't see nods on the screen. It is the intention that we are dealing specifically with the two City of London council appointments. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I'll put that on the floor.
Any comments or questions with respect to what is on the floor? Seeing none, we will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 14-0.
Yes, and what I will do, because I think Councillor Helmer said he wants to entertain a motion to refer, is I will put the appointments on the floor for consideration of Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Squire, and then look to any other motions that colleagues want to make.
All right, so we have a motion to accept the direction through committee of Councillors Van Holst and Councillor Squire. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I'd like to move a motion that we refer these appointments to our next SPPC meeting. I'm going to explain why.
Before you do, that's very clear where it is. You need to have a seconder. I see Councillor Hopkins seconded. Go ahead, Councillor Helmer.
We have a bit of a problem in my perspective, which is since the votes about appointing councillors to committees last year, we've had a couple of times where councillors are not voting for all the positions to be filled. And so there's a selective abstention. And what that has the effect of is it sort of privileges the 1 or 2 people who are voted, or in the case of a committee, 4 out of 5 positions, because everyone else essentially gets a no. And what we're really saying there when we vote on those positions is I'd rather have a vacancy and an incomplete committee or an incomplete board than any of these other people. And I think because we're doing them all at once, that may not be obvious to people that essentially the other candidates are being voted against. Now, there's 2 ways of resolving that. One is people could stop doing that, and we wouldn't have this problem. Or we could have individual votes once we get to the actual council meeting, and people have to be forced to vote yes or no on the people who are being put forward. So that was my intention tonight, was I was just going to separate the votes and people could vote for these council appointments yes or no on both of them separately. Since Councillor Van Holst is not here, I don't think that's really fair to him. And so what I'm suggesting is we refer it back to SPPC. The selective abstention is something that you can do, but I'm saying we shouldn't do that. We should just vote. If there's 5 positions to be filled, vote for 5 people. If there's 2 positions to be filled, vote for 2 people. And if there's some really big problem and you need to vote against somebody for some reason, we should probably just have a yes or no vote on that person. So, I voted against councillors to be appointed to things before. Councillor Van Holst, who is not here, will remember I made strenuous arguments about how he shouldn't be the chair of the committee one time. It's not a very comfortable thing to do. But I think the way that we have been doing things here is not working when we have some people selectively abstaining and some people not. And it's making it very hard to get a fair read on what council wants to do in terms of appointments. So that's why I'm suggesting we refer it. If we vote on it tonight, I'm definitely going to move that we separate them and have 2 votes on each of the candidates.
I will, just for the benefit of colleagues, as a refresher and perhaps for the public, that question was asked very specifically in our last meeting about whether we had the ability to vote for 1 individual or vote for 2, and it was very clear that that option was given and made available to council members. So if that will be the direction that is taken at subsequent SPPC meeting, presuming that this passes, then so be it. So, but I just wanted to clarify that everyone who voted within the rules the last time, and I just want the public to be aware that that was certainly within the rights of the individuals to do that, and that's not me casting an opinion, that's just directly through the clerk. All right, so with that, any other comments or questions? I have Councillor Lewis, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I won't be supporting the referral, and I voted for 2 people at the committee selection, but it's not mine or Councillor Helmer's or any other member of council's role to insist that another councillor vote for 2 people. This is the process that we've adopted through actually quite a bit of work by the clerks and the governance working group committee, and then was accepted by SPPC and council. So this is the process that we accepted. And we accepted this process, if memory serves, over a year ago now. And frankly, people can abstain again in the next round of voting. I'm not going to continue to refer back a vote that was held. You know, the appropriate time to have referred this would have been at committee itself if people didn't feel that they were prepared to vote that night. We had a vote. The results of the vote are what they are. We have 2 candidates that were selected, and I'm going to not support the referral, and I will be supporting those 2 candidates tonight because that's how the democratic process played out at the committee stage.
Thank you. I'm going to invite the clerk to make a comment as well.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to provide a bit of comment with respect to the policy. It is permissive when there's more than one position to be filled that voters may vote for as many candidates as there are positions to be filled. It's permissive. And I also wanted to note that because the selection process is a selection process and not a vote, it's not a formal abstention as would be during a vote if a member had a conflict. So I just wanted to provide that additional information.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I want to thank the councillor for bringing this forward because I too had grave concerns at SPPC, the way the vote turned out. And this has happened to us before. And I understand that we have a process in place and this is the process and we can vote for 1 or 2. But I do have concerns that this becomes strategic voting. And to me, that is not the democratic process. And we should revisit it. And I appreciate the councillor referring this back, given that we have one councillor here missing, and he should be part of that conversation. So I would encourage each and every one of us to refer this back and look at it again, because this has happened to us in the past. And I do think it needs to have a full discussion on what and how we are voting for these positions for councillors when we support them at committees or at boards. So I would encourage everyone to refer this back.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Does anyone else wish to comment on this? Seeing none, we'll call the question. Oh, Councillor Cassidy, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's appropriate to refer it back. I was caught off guard with this, and I take Councillor Lewis's comment to heart. I should have referred it back then, but as I said, I was caught off guard, and we started into the process, and so I voted. But there were 2 councillors that were unexpectedly absent from the meeting. They weren't planned absences, and so they were not able to participate at number 1. Number 2, there was nothing in the agenda that prepared us that this vote was going to take place. It's very clearly said in the SPPC agenda that we would be voting on 4 members and from the community, but there was nothing in the agenda that warned us we would be voting for councillors. And so I think it would have been more appropriate to refer it back. I apologize for not doing it at the time. And I think it was necessary to have a full complement of city councillors at the meeting when this vote was taking place. That's why I'm supporting the referral back.
Sometimes, colleagues, as we know, there are reasons why a council member cannot be in attendance, and we always regard that with great respect, so that we are aware. And that's why one of the practices that we have implemented of late is to advise colleagues when someone is going to be away or is away, and or when returns. We think that's appropriate and respectful. So we will continue that practice as well. I have asked the clerk to check on some comment Councillor Castillo made about not having an awareness that council, the council members were being put into consideration for that, and I'm just going to bear your indulgence for a moment. Go ahead, clerk.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would like to confirm that although it was not separated out on the agenda cover pages, it is outlined in the staff report, the need to make appointments of elected officials to that board.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Your Worship. Should this referral back pass, I just want to ensure through the clerks that meeting times and frequency will be provided to councillors, as well that any other councillor who wishes to put their name forward could do so. Just looking for clarification.
Clerk.
Thank you. Through the chair, if the matter is referred back to the committee, it's up to the committee how they manage the appointment at that time.
Councillor Pelosi.
Okay, and the first part of the question, that the meeting time and frequencies will also be provided in the meeting agenda if this is referred back to SPPC?
I think you're asking the clerk that.
Yes, please.
Certainly, we can look into that.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, what the clerk is saying is it's not a required component of the voting process, but that would be information to be shared. I think that probably makes very practical sense so that we know. And I would suggest if this is referred back that it be that be broad information that's included in what will be directed to staff. So with that, any other comments or questions, colleagues? So what we're voting on is the referral back to the next SPPC meeting. So with that, we will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion is lost, 7-7.
Thank you. Then back to you then, Deputy Mayor.
There's already a motion on the floor before the referral, so it stands on the floor, which is the appointment of the two councillors who the committee selected.
Comments or questions? Councillor Elmer?
So I'm going to be voting against both these appointments, but I would like them to be separated so we could deal with them individually.
So noted. Thank you. Any other comments? I'll use Chair's prerogative to put them in the appropriate order. Any other comments or questions, colleagues? We'll do that in the order of votes. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, if the votes are separated, I'm just going to go by the way they are in the agenda, and I think that's the most appropriate. Councillor Van Holst is first, and then Councillor Squire is second.
Okay, so the motion will be for Councillor to remove Councillor Van Holst as one of the representatives. We'll just wire that up and then turn that over for voting. We're ready. We'll turn your attention to the vote.
Councillor Kaibaga, Councillor Pelosa. Closing the vote, the motion's lost 6-8.
Councillor Squire's appointment is next.
We'll give the clerk an opportunity to put that up. Go ahead, clerk, we're ready. All right, colleagues, we'll turn your attention for the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-2.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
I would ask the clerk, would the vacant appointment just be dealt with at committee, or is that dealt with tonight?
Through the chair, I'm going to defer this one to the city clerk, who's also on the call.
Go ahead, clerk.
You can do either, but my recommendation would be to just refer that last appointment back to committee to allow for a more wholesome discussion, but you can do either way.
Deputy Mayor.
On the advice of the clerk, I guess I would make a motion to refer the filling of the vacant position on the Housing Board to Sppc committee.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for that? You have Councillor Lehman. Any comments or questions that this be referred to the next committee meeting? Seeing none, we'll call the question. I'll ask colleagues, if you're not on mute, to mute yourselves, please.
Councillor Sully. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
I think that's all of the items on the SPPC report.
Thanks very much. Before we let you sit down, we now have the second report of the Audit Committee. We're calling you to present the report, please.
Thank you. I have the report of the Audit Committee. It's the second meeting of the Audit Committee. There are 7 items. I'll put all the items on the floor together. This includes financial audit and a number of updates.
Does anyone wish to have any of these items voted on separately? Seeing none, any comments or questions? I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair I'd like to make a comment.
Sure, I'll go to the Mayor.
That feels a bit strange, but colleagues, I I indicated at a recent meeting with senior staff how the audit committee report, which really is the financial heart of what we're trying to do as a city, as a municipality, in terms of things that we need to do, the hard work that goes into this, but the essential work that goes into this from our treasurer and the team. And I just want to say thank you to them for the great work that they do, but also the work of the audit committee as well. And Deputy Mayor, I know you take a real specific interest in this, and we appreciate your efforts in this as well. So thank you all who are involved in the audit committee, but I'd like to go in a bit behind that and say thank you to our staff who put the hard work into this to make it as comprehensive as it is. Those are my comments, Chair.
I'll turn the chair back to you. I have no one on the speaker's list.
Thanks. Any other comments or questions then? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Deputy Mayor Morgan?
That's all the items I have. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, there are no deferred matters nor inquiries for which I've been made aware. But we do have an inquiry, excuse me. Councillor Turner, go ahead. I never want to ignore you, ever. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just grab it here. I might, through Your Worship, my question for staff is with respect to the family swim pass. I've had a number of inquiries from residents regarding cancellation this summer of the family swim pass, and some concerns about the impacts that that's had on their families and their ability to get swimming in an affordable manner. Through you, Your Worship, to staff, my question is, might they be able to comment a little bit about what the background of that was, and if any measures are being taken to ensure that access to swimming and recreation are being done in an affordable and equitable manner for the rest of the season, and what the future plans might be as well.
Thank you for the question. I'm wondering if that might be Ms. Smith that would like to provide some background.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you for the question. So the family swim pass has always been available as an approved user fee for Londoners for our outdoor aquatic facilities. And in 2020, there were several complaints regarding the family pass due to the number of COVID restrictions we had to put in place about available times to swim, capacity, gathering restrictions. Some pass holders felt that they weren't getting the service level that they'd got in the previous years for the family pass. So therefore, we made some changes in 2021, noting that there were still similar COVID restrictions with respect to swimming. And we eliminated the outdoor family pass as there were other options available for customers. However, like Councillor Turner, we have also received complaints again this summer, this time for eliminating the family pass. So in an effort to balance cost and support our community and families to enjoy the city's outdoor amenities, particularly in the times of COVID, Civic Administration has reinstated the family pass option. So any member of the public who's reached out to us, we will contact over the coming next couple of days about the availability of the swim pass, and it will be another option along with many options we have for our outdoor aquatic swimmers.
Councillor Turner, any other questions relating to your query?
Through Your Worship, that answers it, and I thank staff for their quick and swift attention to the matter, and for addressing it in a way that addresses the concerns of the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Now I can say with confidence that there are no other inquiries for which I'm aware, been made aware. Nor are there any emergent motions. So So in a moment, we're just going to take us through bylaws before we go into closed session. And we're just taking some clarity around Bill 293, which relates to the LMCH board. So just bear with us as we ensure that we have that appropriate for you. All right, so colleagues, what you see under bylaws, section 13 are bills 292 through 303, but we will be calling 293 separately, excuse me, as amended, and as I indicated, it's the LMCH board based on the discussions and support of council as amended. So with that, what I'm going to be doing is looking for mover and seconder for introduction and first reading of bills 292, 294 through 303. Do I have a mover? I have Councillor Lehman. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Van Meerbergen. Thank you very much. Let's call the vote.
Your Worship.
Councillor Turner?
Can we have Bill 302 pulled? I'm not sure if you included that in the suite that you put forward there.
I absolutely swept it through and buried it in the all of the bills that were to be there. Councillor Hopkins, was that the same concern? I can't hear you, please.
I can have the name of that bill. I don't have all the information in front of me.
We'll pull that up. I'll get the clerk just to clarify for the benefit of everyone what 302 represents.
Thank you. Through the chair, Bill 302 is a bylaw to amend bylaw number Z1 to rezone an area of land located at 193 Queens Avenue.
That's fine, thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to go back to the mover and seconder to see if they're comfortable with moving Bill 292, 294 through 301 and 303. So basically all the bills with the exclusion of Bill 293, which is the LMCH board composition, and 302, which is the rezoning references to Queens Avenue. Moved by Councillor Lehman. Councillor Van Meerbergen, is your second still standing? Thank you very much. We'll call that vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
So for second reading of Bill 2 through 303, with the exception of 293 and 302, as referenced in the first reading, I will look for a mover, please. Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Thank you. Any comments, discussion? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Now, colleagues, of bills 292 through 303, with the exception of 293 and 302, I will look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Thanks very much. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to Bill 293, which is the composition of the London Middlesex Community Housing Board. For that, for the introduction and first reading, I'll look for a mover and seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Pelosi, seconded by, this could sound like an auction if we're not careful. Councillor Lewis, thank you very much. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-1.
So call is I can't recognize you if I can't see you. So I would invite you as we go through the bylaws to have screens on, please. And if you wish to either be move or second any of these, then you're absolutely welcome to do so. So with that, colleague, for Bill 293, I'll require a mover and seconder of second reading. Do I have a mover, please? Councillor Pelosi. Councillor Lewis, thanks very much. Any comments, questions? Councillor Cassidy, you have a question.
Yes, I know you mentioned it, Your Worship, but you said it really quickly, and I just want to confirm that this bylaw is amended from the original form.
As amended, Councillor, yes. Thank you for the question and the clarity. Any other questions? Let's call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
The enactment of Bill 293, the LMCH Board as amended. I'll require a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Thank you very much. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Colleagues, I'll turn to 02, which deals with Queens Avenue parking discussion that we had, and the motion moved. So for introduction and first reading of Bill 302, I'll require a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Thank you very much. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 11-3.
Colleagues, for 302, I'll require a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Thank you very much. Any discussion? I see none. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 11-3.
Colleagues, now for third reading and enactment of Bill 302, I'll require a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Thank you very much. We will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 11-3.
Thank you, colleagues. For the benefit of the public, we're just about to go into closed session. When we are have completed our items, we will come back into public session and report out. But I'd like to call on the clerk as I do, just to advise the public what it is, the items that we're going in to deal with in closed session. If I could ask the clerk for that, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are 5 items, 6 items, 7, 8, 9 items from Corporate Services Committee meetings and 2 items related to the Community and Protective Services Committee, all of which are outlined on the Public Council agenda.
Thanks very much. So that's a total of 11 items we'll be dealing with. So to go into closed session, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Thank you very much. We will call the vote.
Councillor Salee, Councillor Hopkins,
I vote yes.
Councillor Salee, I will mark the councillors absent. That motion's carried 13-0.
Colleagues, I'll just ask you to bear with us a few moments while we need to shut off the public viewing. Thank you. Don't go too far away.